Beta. Now we are going to talk about respiration in human beings. How do we respire? So the respiratory system consists of so many things. It starts with our nostrils. We all know what is nostrils. So it starts with the nostrils, the nasal cavity, pharynx, trachea, lungs, bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. So many things together constitute the respiratory system in human beings. So we will talk about each of these parts in detail one by one. Before that, let me just introduce you with each of them. Nostrils. Nostrils is nothing but the nose. So in nose we have two nostrils, right? Nasal cavity, the nostrils will then extend into the nasal cavity. So this cavity is nothing but the nasal cavity. Then we have, so you would have felt that, right? When you breathe in, you feel that there is some empty space inside your nose. Like from your nostrils, the air moves inside and you can feel that there is some empty space. You can actually feel it with your hands that there is some empty space inside your nose. So that is nothing but the nasal cavity. After the nasal cavity comes the pharynx. I have already introduced you with pharynx. What is pharynx? It is a common point for both, or common entry for both food and wind. So food comes through the mouth and wind comes through the nose. So both of them reach pharynx. But pharynx is the place where it differentiates the food, and it sends the food into the food pipe, that is esophagus, and it sends the air into the air pipe. So next is trachea. Trachea is nothing but the wind pipe. So here you can see this is the trachea, a pipe-like structure. So this trachea is nothing but the wind pipe. Now this trachea will go and it will reach the lungs. So lungs, there are two lungs, a pair of lungs present, and this trachea will go and connect to both the lungs. Bronchi. What are bronchi? This trachea will divide like this in both the lungs. So this branches, the branches of trachea are known as bronchi. The bronchi will further divide into smaller branches, that is known as bronchioles, and bronchioles will again divide into further smaller branches, that is alveoli. Right? So now you are aware of what are the different parts of the respiratory system. Now we will discuss about each one of them in detail. So let us start with the nostrils and the nasal cavity. Nostrils, openings through which air is taken in. So in our nose we have two openings through which the air is taken inside. Fine hairs present which filters the air taken in. So you can also see that inside our nostrils we have very small hairs. So those hairs actually, when the air is taken in, if there are any dust particles in that air, so those hair will prevent the dust particles from getting inside and it will block them in themselves. So that is the function of the hairs which are present inside the nostrils. Nasal cavity. Cavity where the air reaches through the nostrils. The way we spoke about the buccal cavity or the oral cavity, we saw that the food is taken in through the mouth and mouth leads to the oral cavity. Similarly here, the air is taken in through the nostrils and the nostrils lead to the nasal cavity. A central septum separates the left and the right air passages, dividing the two nostrils. So here we have a central septum. It is sometimes also known as the nasal septum. Now if you look at the nose, like this from the front view, this is the front view of a nose. What do you see? These are the two nostrils, right? So if you see your own nose, at the center of that, what divides the two holes? The two parts are divided by a wall-like structure. So this wall is known as the central septum, or sometimes it is also known as the nasal septum. So this septum actually separates the left and the right air passages, dividing the two nostrils. If this wall is not there, then there will be just one big hole, right? So this nasal septum separates the left and right air passages. Nasal passages are lined with ciliated epithelium and mucus. So now once the air enters into the nose and passes through the nasal cavity, so everywhere in this passage it is seen that it is lined with ciliated epithelium. What is ciliated epithelium? The epithelial tissue which is lined with cilia. Cilia are the fine hair-like structures, right? And it is also lined with mucus. What is mucus? The slimy, slippery substance. So what does they do? Mucus being a a slippery watery substance, it tries to moisten the air. It tries to make the air little moist. And what does cilia do? Cilia tries to block the dust particles or microorganisms or any kind of germs present in the air. So this cilia, mucus, as well as the fine hairs which are present in our nostrils, they all actually help to prevent the dust particles entering inside our body with the air. Right? So now you must be wondering that now from mouth we have an oral cavity. Again through the nostrils we have a nasal cavity. Now how is the nasal cavity and the oral cavity separated? So oral cavity is somewhere here, right? Now this nasal cavity and oral cavity is separated by a bony plate. So this is the bony plate. So you can see, because the nasal cavity and the oral cavity needs to be separated. Otherwise, there will be no segregation between the food which we eat and the air which we take in. So the air and the food pathways should be kept separate from each other. Right? So we are clear with nostrils and nasal cavity. What is their function? Okay, now air enters through nostrils, get warmed and moistened at nasal cavity. So nostrils are used only for entry of air, and nasal cavity warms the air, moistens the air with the help of mucus. Then the next part is pharynx. I have talked about pharynx before also. It is a common passage for food and air. So what happens, both food and air reaches the pharynx. From here it gets divided into the two different tubes. So food goes to the food pipe, that is esophagus, and air goes to the wind pipe, that is trachea. Now trachea, now you must be confused then how trachea and esophagus are situated. The trachea lies in front of the esophagus. Now if you look at this diagram, this is the trachea. This is trachea, and this red colored pipe is the esophagus. So you can see here that esophagus lies in front of trachea. And where do we have the pharynx? This is the pharynx. So this point is the pharynx. So this is the point where it segregates into the food, and the air segregates into two different pipes. Now, how is it that food does not enter into the trachea? I mean, how is it controlled actually? So, how the pharynx controls that food does not enter into trachea? So, for that, there is a small structure called epiglottis. What is epiglottis? Epiglottis, here you can see a small structure here in red. So, this is epiglottis, which is a small flap of skin, and it prevents the food from entering the respiratory tract. So, this is the epiglottis. So what does it do? It is kind of a door. So if the door opens, the food can enter. If the door closes, the food can't enter. Now this epiglottis is always closed. It is an always locked door. So because of the presence of this small flap of skin, food can never enter inside the trachea. So epiglottis is the one which prevents the entry of food into the respiratory tract. Well, now just imagine what would happen if the food enters into the respiratory tract, because this pipe is made in such a way that it can carry air. Now when food particles, that too when complex food particles will enter inside it, the tube will get choked and the person will not able to breathe in and breathe out, because the passage will get blocked. So as a result, the person might die. Right? So this segregation is very, very important. So here from this diagram you can clearly see how the digestive system and the respiratory system, their location. So this esophagus is going to the stomach, and the stomach will then go to the intestine. And here this trachea is going and connecting to the lungs. Clear? Okay. So now let us talk about trachea, that is the wind pipe. So this is the pipe which is actually going to carry the air from the pharynx. Air passes from pharynx to this pipe. So the air entered our body through the nostrils, then it went to the nasal cavity. From there it went to the pharynx, and from pharynx it came to the windpipe or trachea. C-shaped rings of cartilage are present on trachea. So if you look at this tube, you can see that there are some ring-like structure on this tube. So what are they? They are cartilage rings. We already know, right, what is cartilage, what is bone. This is a kind of connective tissue. So this cartilage are present on the trachea and they are C-shaped. So if you look at it, it is not completely circular, but rather it is in the shape of C. So these kind of cartilages are present on the trachea. So what is the purpose of this cartilage? It prevents collapsing of the trachea even if there is no air. Now suppose if inside there is no air, so the trachea is quite flexible. So if inside there is no air, there are chances that it can collapse down. It can shrink up. So in order to prevent that collapsing, these cartilages are present to give it some structural support. So what does these cartilage do? Prevents trachea to collapse when there is no air. It is internally lined by cilia and mucus. So you see most of the organs of the respiratory system, they are lined with cilia and mucus. And needless to say, what is the purpose of cilia and mucus? As I mentioned before also, they try to block the dust particles, microorganisms, germs or any other undesired particle. So see, everywhere they are present so that the air which is coming inside our body can be filtered as much as possible. So even inside the nasal cavity we had them. So in the nostrils also we had fine hairs. So some filtration is happening at all places. Runs from throat till the thoracic cavity. So the trachea starts from throat. So you can see it is starting from somewhere here from the throat and it runs till the thoracic cavity. Now the question is, what is thoracic cavity? The word thoracic has come from the word thorax. So let us see what is thorax. Now let us suppose if this is a human being, we divide the body into different parts. The upper part is called as head. The next part is known as thorax. And the third part is known as abdomen. So broadly, the body of a human being is divided into these three divisions: head, thorax and abdomen. So in the abdomen comes the structures like small intestine, large intestine, stomach, all those things comes inside the abdomen level. What is thorax? What all things lie in the thoracic? So this cavity or this empty space or this space of the abdomen is known as the abdominal cavity. This space of the thorax is known as the thoracic cavity. So the lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. The end of the thoracic cavity, or what determines the border of the thoracic cavity? Diaphragm. Diaphragm is a muscular structure which denotes the end of the thoracic cavity. So the lungs are situated within the thoracic cavity, and this trachea, it starts from the throat and it ends in this thoracic cavity. So what are the organs which are situated in thoracic cavity? The lungs, the heart, they are situated in thoracic cavity, right? So this trachea runs from throat till the thoracic cavity. About the lungs, which are the functional units or which are the main places where the actual absorption of oxygen takes place in the respiratory system. So lungs are spongy elastic organs. As you can see here, these are the two lungs which we have in our body. They are spongy and elastic. Elastic means they can increase or decrease in size. So it has got that flexibility. Located in the thoracic cavity, as I explained just now before some time. So the lower surface of the lungs rests on the diaphragm. I mentioned before, right? The diaphragm denotes the end of the thoracic cavity. So the lower portion of the two lungs, the lower surface rests on the diaphragm. There are two lungs in the human body, the right lung and the left lung. So which is our right lung? This is the right lung and this is the left lung. Now the lung, each of these lungs is again divided into different regions. So the right lung is divided into three lobes. Lobes are nothing but the regions. So the right lung is divided into two lobes and the left lung is divided into two lobes. The right lung is divided into three lobes. So these are the two lobes in the left lung. So this upper lobe and the lower lobe. So the upper lobe is known as superior lobe and the lower lobe is known as inferior lobe. Superior means above. So the above the lobe which is located on the above side is superior and the one which is on the lower side is inferior. Now similarly, the right lung is also divided into 3 lobes. So the above one is the superior lobe, and here this below one is the inferior lobe, and this lobe which lies in the middle of the superior and inferior is known as the middle lobe. Right, so this is how the lung is divided into different lobes, enclosed by a 2-layered membrane. As I said, lungs are the organs where the actual exchange of gases take place. So these organs should be located well inside the body and well protected. So to ensure that protection, it is surrounded by a 2-layered membrane. So here you can see 2 black lines, right? So that is the double-layered membrane. And the space between these two is known as the pleural cavity. So this 2-layered membrane is known as pleura. Pleura is the name of this membrane, and pleural cavity is the space between the 2 membranes. So this space, this white colored space, that is the pleural cavity, and this pleural cavity contains a pleural fluid to lubricate and prevent friction. So the presence of a fluid outside the lungs will lubricate it, will make the surface slippery, and it will prevent friction, because we do not want any kind of friction. Friction is nothing but resistance to the flow of anything. So we do not want any kind of resistance here. So in order to prevent friction, the pleural cavity is filled with a pleural fluid. Lungs play an important role in breathing and oxygen absorption. Now, since the lungs are the organs which actually absorbs the oxygen which we breathe in, that is the reason it is elastic. Because when we breathe in, that extra air which we are taking inside our body, that needs some extra space as well. So these lungs can expand at that time and can fill in the air inside them. So it plays a very important role in breathing and oxygen absorption. So we will look into the next slides that how exactly the lungs help in oxygen absorption. The next is bronchi. What is bronchi? As I said, the trachea divides into thinner tubes called bronchi as it enters the thoracic cavity. So here you can see this is the trachea as it is entering the thoracic cavity. So this cavity is the thoracic cavity. It will divide into bronchi. So how will the bronchi look like? Let me divide the lung into the different lobes. So this is the superior lobe, this is the inferior lobe, this is the middle lobe. And here we have the superior lobe and the inferior lobe. Now once the trachea enters into the thoracic cavity, what happens? It has to enter into the lungs now. Right? So while entering into the lungs, this entire thick tracheal tube doesn't enter itself. So it divides into branches, and these branches are known as bronchi. So the right bronchus, that means it will divide into 2 branches. One is right bronchus and the other one is left bronchus. So the right bronchus will enter inside the right lung and the left bronchus will enter inside the left lung. So this is the left lung and this is the right lung. Correct? So since in the right lung we have 3 different lobes, so therefore there will be 3 bronchi reaching into each lobe. So how will the bronchus looks like? It will be something like this. One branch getting into the superior lobe, one branch getting into the inferior lobe, and one branch entering into the middle lobe. So this is how it will look like. Similarly, when it enters into the left lung, then what will happen? So one bronchus will go into the inferior lobe and the other bronchus will go into the superior lobe. So that is why it is said that the right bronchus divides into 3 bronchi and the left bronchus divides into 2 bronchi. That's because there are 2 lobes in the left lung and there are 3 lobes in the right lung. So what does these bronchi do? They do nothing. They just carry the air which was being carried by trachea inside the lungs. Clear? Okay, so now the air is finally reaching the lungs. Now the bronchioles and alveoli. Now bronchi and bronchioles, the names are quite similar, right? So what are bronchioles? Each bronchus further divides into finer branches called bronchioles. So here you can see that this is the trachea. So this trachea, as it entered inside the lungs, it broke down into the bronchus, and each of these bronchi then further divides into smaller branches to form bronchioles. So the further branching of bronchi are known as bronchioles. Each bronchiole ends in tiny cluster of air chambers called alveoli. That means first there was a thick tube called trachea. Then trachea, while entering into the lungs, they divide into bronchi. Each bronchi further divides into bronchioles, and each bronchiole then further end up in alveoli. So what are alveoli? They are a cluster of tiny air chambers. Air chamber means they look like balloon. So alveoli are balloon-like structures which are filled with air. So see, this is the magnified image of an alveoli. So the small alveoli, which look like branches in this picture, but when you actually see its magnified image, they look like this. So see, they are balloon-like structures. And what are these balloons? They are nothing but air chambers. So they are air-filled balloons. So this air is the one which has been taken in from the atmosphere through the nostrils. So now these alveoli will actually transfer this air inside our body. So the actual exchange of gas will take place at the alveoli level. So alveoli provide a surface where the exchange of gases can take place. So inside the lungs we have the bronchi, bronchioles and the alveoli. So alveoli are balloon-like structures which are filled with air, and the actual exchange of gases take place along the surface of the alveoli. So the alveoli has alveolar duct, and the walls of these alveoli are covered with capillaries. So walls of alveoli contain an extensive network of blood vessels, that is capillaries. So you can see here that these are the alveoli, the balloon-like structures, and these red colored structures which you see, they are nothing but blood vessels. What are blood vessels? As the name suggests, they are vessels which carry blood. And blood is flowing throughout our body, right? So the alveoli are in direct contact with the blood. So that means if the alveoli can transfer the air into the blood, the job is done. The blood will then carry this oxygen to different parts of the body. So different part of the body will receive the gas, right? So the actual gaseous exchange takes place between alveoli and the blood vessels. And what are capillaries? Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels, right? So actual exchange of air take place between alveoli and the blood vessels called capillaries. So because for this purpose, the walls of the alveoli are very thin. They have very thin walls, as well as the walls of the capillaries are also very thin, so that the exchange of gases can take place effectively and easily. So that is why alveoli are called as the functional units of lungs. So whatever we studied in the respiratory system, we saw that the purpose of this respiratory system is exchange of gases. Correct? And this exchange of gases did not take place anywhere, either in the nostrils or nasal cavity or trachea or bronchi or bronchioles. So the actual exchange of gases took place in the alveoli. So they are the functional units of lungs. All other parts of the respiratory system, they only helped in the passage of air. They helped the air to reach the lungs. Right? So alveoli is the place where the actual exchange of gases will take place, and after that the gas will be transferred to the capillaries, which are the blood vessels, and these blood vessels will then transport the blood through to the rest of the body. That means it will ensure that the air or the gas reaches each and every cell of the body, and then inside each and every cell the oxidation of the assimilated molecules will happen. That means the oxidation of food, which we talked about, glucose will get converted into carbon dioxide, hydrogen, water and energy. So that process will take place inside each and every cell of our body, right? So I hope you got the entire structure. That means how this respiration is actually happening, how lungs help in absorption of oxygen, because inside the lungs are actually like bags. So inside the lungs we actually have so many different things, that is bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. So what did we see so far? We saw that the air which we breathe in, they enter through the nostrils, then they reach
the nasal cavity and then the pharynx. From pharynx it reaches the trachea. From trachea it branches out to form the bronchi. The bronchi further branches out to bronchioles, and the bronchioles then ends up in balloon-like tiny air chambers called alveoli. The alveoli are connected, or they have their walls contain an extensive network of the blood vessels called capillaries. So these blood vessels will then transport it to the rest of the body. Now this portion, that how the blood vessels actually transported to the rest of the body, that is what we are going to discuss in the transportation part. So after the respiration is over, we are going to talk about transportation, right? So this portion, that how actually the gases are transported to each and every corner of the body, that we will deal in the transportation topic. Now once it reaches to each and every corner of the body, that means it reaches each cell of the body. Now inside the cell will take place the cellular respiration. That means oxidation of food will take place to release energy. Right? Now when the oxidation of food will take place, what will happen? Carbon dioxide will be released, and this carbon dioxide, it will again follow the same path backwards. So the cells will release that carbon dioxide into the blood vessels. So these capillaries will again bring it back to the alveoli. From alveoli it will come to the bronchioles, bronchi, and then through the same pathway carbon dioxide will be given out. So now you understand how oxygen is taken in and how carbon dioxide is given out. Clear? So now the question is, when we breathe in this extra air which is coming in, where and how is this extra space created? Because for this extra air which is coming in, we need some space, right? So in this case, air pressure also plays a very important role. Because for the air to move from one place to another, there has to be some difference in pressure so that it can move, right? So let us see that what happens within. So let us try to understand the physical process of breathing, the physical aspect of breathing. Now in breathing, there are two physical processes which actually take place. One is inhalation, that means taking in the good air. Good air would mean the air which is present in the atmosphere, which has a lot of oxygen. So taking in that good air. Exhalation means releasing out the foul air. Foul air means the bad air. Why is it bad air? Because this air contains more of carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration. Due to the process of respiration, carbon dioxide is produced as a product which is no more needed by the body. So carbon dioxide becomes a waste for the body. So that is why it is said to be the foul air. So inhalation is taking in good air and exhalation is giving out bad air. So we will talk about both these processes of inhalation and exhalation, and we will see what happens physically. So let us talk about inhalation. So what happens during inhalation? That is when we take in air. The diaphragm muscles contract. Where are the diaphragm muscles? So this is the diaphragm. So here we have some muscles. Now these muscles actually contract. So what will happen when they contract? They will come closer to each other. As a result, what will happen to the diaphragm? The diaphragm will be pulled down. You imagine the situation like this. Let us suppose this is the diaphragm and these are the diaphragm muscles. Now if these muscles contract, it would be something like this. The muscles will become shorter and as a result it will pull the diaphragm down. Now if the muscles expand, so they will become longer and as a result the diaphragm will be pulled more up. So when the diaphragm muscles contract, the diaphragm is pulled down. Now if the diaphragm is pulled down, what will happen? The thoracic cavity will increase, because if you have a structure like this, let us suppose. Now if this particular thing is pulled down, so what will happen? It will become like this. So the space inside has increased. So similarly here also the thoracic cavity will increase and as a result the lungs will expand. So the thoracic cavity expands and the lungs expand. Now when the lungs expand means the volume inside the lungs increases. So the volume increases. Now we know that pressure is inversely proportional to volume, right? We always know since beginning that the product of pressure and volume is always constant. So if the volume increases, the pressure decreases. Now, when the lungs expand, the volume increases, and as a result, the air pressure inside will decrease. So now what happened? The air pressure inside the lungs is less. So the air pressure here is less and the air pressure outside is more. So there is a difference in pressure between two regions. So as a result of this difference in pressure, air will flow from region of higher pressure to region of lower pressure. So this is the region of higher pressure and this is the region of lower pressure. So the air will flow in. And this is what happens in inhalation. Right? So air will flow from outside to the lungs. From lungs it will go to the capillaries, then to the cells, and in the cells the respiration will happen. Clear? So let us similarly look at the process of exhalation now. That is what happens when carbon dioxide is thrown out of the body. So in this case, the reverse situation happens. Here the diaphragm muscles expand. So when the muscles expand, what happens to the diaphragm? Right. The diaphragm is pulled up. As a result, the thoracic cavity contracts. Therefore, the lungs will also contract, and as a result, the volume of the lungs will decrease. Pressure being inversely proportional to volume, what will happen to the pressure? So pressure will increase. So the air pressure here will be more than the air pressure outside. So air pressure inside increases. So now air will flow from outside to inside. So that is why exhalation occurs. Clear? So now from outside it will come. So now from the inside cells, it will come to the capillaries. From there, it will come to the lungs. From lungs, it will directly go to outside. So now you understand the physical process of inhalation and exhalation and how air pressure plays a role in the transfer of oxygen or carbon dioxide from inside to outside and vice versa. So now we have come to an end of the second life process, that is respiration. So what did we study in respiration? Respiration is about two things. One is exchange of gases. The other is oxidation of the food molecules to release energy which can be used for various metabolic activities. So let us have a quick review of the process of respiration. Now, air is taken in through the nostrils. Which is this air? This is good air which is rich in oxygen. So this oxygen is taken in, so it reaches the nostrils. From nostrils, it enters the nasal cavity. From nasal cavity, it goes to the pharynx. Pharynx is the common place for both food and wind. So pharynx sends it to the windpipe, that is trachea. Now trachea flows down the thoracic cavity, and as soon as it enters the thoracic cavity, it divides into bronchi, which enters into the right and left lungs respectively. On entering the lungs, the bronchi divide into further branches called bronchioles, and these bronchioles further end up in tiny air chambers called alveoli. Now, the walls of these alveoli are connected to a network of capillaries, and capillaries are nothing but the blood vessels. So, these capillaries will take it to the blood, and through the blood, it reaches each and every tissues of the body, and from the tissues, it reaches each and every cells of the body. Now, inside this cell, what will happen? Inside this, in the cytoplasm of this cell, which process will take place? Glycolysis will take place. Right? In the cytoplasm, glycolysis will take place where the glucose will get converted into pyruvate. Correct? Now this pyruvate had been waiting for oxygen because it needs oxygen for oxidation. So once this oxygen comes in, what is coming in right now? It is oxygen which is coming in. So this is all oxygen which is coming in. Now once this oxygen arrives, the pyruvate becomes extremely happy. So the pyruvate goes into the mitochondria of the cells, and then in the mitochondria, aerobic respiration will take place. I have discussed this in detail, right? So in their aerobic respiration will take place and energy will be released. So this energy will be released in the form of ATP molecules, and as a result of aerobic respiration, another byproduct will be formed, that is carbon dioxide. But we do not want this carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide is a waste product for the body. So what will the cell do? These cells will throw this carbon dioxide out and it will send it back to the tissues. So what will the tissues do? The tissues also does not want this carbon dioxide. So the tissues will send it back to the blood. Blood means the blood vessels. I am not talking in detail about how it is getting transported, because that part we will see in transportation. So there again the capillaries, that is the blood vessels with the thinnest walls, will carry it, and the capillaries then will exchange or will give this carbon dioxide to the alveoli. The alveoli will give it to the bronchioles. The bronchioles will then give it to the bronchi. The bronchi will then send it back to the trachea, which will again send it back to the nostrils. From there it will go to outside. So what went outside? Carbon dioxide. So we see carbon dioxide went outside and oxygen came inside, and here the entire process of internal respiration took place. Clear? So respiration is about two things. It is exchange of gases and the internal oxidation of food to release energy. So I hope that this video on respiration would have helped you to understand the process of respiration. Now, what are we going to study next? Before that, a quick description of the NET process. So here, what is the NET process? We have seen absorption of oxygen, release of carbon dioxide. Now, you might think that isn't it not very risky for the lungs to handle this oxygen and carbon dioxide simultaneously? One is getting released and one is being taken in. Now, lungs always have some residual volume of air so that there is sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and the carbon dioxide to be released, because at no point of time it should happen that lungs are running short of air. So they should always have some air. So that is why they always have a residual volume of air. That means an extra volume of air which is always present in the lungs, so that the time which is taken for oxygen to be absorbed or the time which is taken for the carbon dioxide to be released, that time also lungs have some air in it. Okay. So with this we will conclude our discussion on respiration. So now we will talk